Maybe it happens in the quietest part of the day. Rain taps against the window. The room is a little cold. Your hands reach for a cup, and before you even taste it, the warmth is already doing something to you. The steam rises. Your shoulders loosen. For a moment, the world feels slower, softer, easier to carry. That is strange, isn't it? Because tea seems so ordinary that we almost stop seeing it. A handful of leaves, hot water, a habit repeated in kitchens, offices, train stations, tiny apartments, and old family homes. And yet this small daily ritual has traveled farther, changed more lives, and gathered more meaning than most people ever imagine. What looks simple in the cup is not simple at all. Behind that familiar warmth is a story shaped by mountains, monasteries, trade routes, royal courts, factories, and long human evenings filled with conversation, silence, work, comfort, and waiting. Somehow, one leaf found its way into all of them. So before we talk about nations and history, hold on to that feeling for just a second. The heat in your palms, the pause it creates, the reason people keep returning to it. Because once you see where that comfort came from, an everyday cup of tea will never feel quite as ordinary again. So how did this happen? How did something so quiet, just leaves and water, become one of the most shared experiences on earth? Why do millions of people who have never met each other follow the same small ritual every single day? Some drink it to wake up, others to slow down, some for taste, others for comfort. But the habit is everywhere. And if you look closely, there's something even more curious. People don't just drink tea, they build meaning around it. In some places, it marks the beginning of the day. In others, it fills the space between meals. Sometimes it's a social moment. Sometimes it's deeply personal. The same drink, but completely different worlds. That raises a bigger question. Is tea just a beverage that's spread across cultures? Or is it something that changed shape depending on the people who touched it? Because if that's true, then every cup is carrying more than flavor. It's carrying choices, beliefs, habits, and stories layered over thousands of years. To understand that, we have to go back, far back, to a time before tea was a habit, before it was a culture, before anyone even knew what it could become. We need to return to a place where it all began, long before history was written down, in a world where stories were still the only way to explain discovery. Let's step out of the present for a moment. Imagine the noise of modern life fading away, the traffic, the screens, the constant movement. Now replace it with something older. The air is cooler. The land is vast and green. Mist hangs low over hills that seem to stretch forever. There are no cities here, no crowded streets, only wind, trees, and the quiet rhythm of nature. This is where our journey really begins. Not with a recipe, not with a brand, but with a moment, small, accidental, and almost invisible at the time. The kind of moment that no one could have guessed would echo across thousands of years. Stories from ancient China tell us about a ruler who was deeply curious about the natural world. He believed that what people consumed mattered, that what entered the body could heal it, harm it, or change it. So he paid attention to plants, to water, to anything that might carry hidden effects. One day, while resting outdoors, he prepared hot water to drink, something he insisted on for cleanliness and health. As he waited, something unexpected happened. A light breeze moved through the branches above him. A few leaves loosened, drifting slowly through the air until they landed in the water. At first, nothing seemed important. Just leaves, just water. But then the color began to change. The clear water slowly deepened into a warm golden shade. A new scent rose with the steam, fresh, unfamiliar, but inviting enough to make him pause. It wasn't the smell of plain water anymore. Something had shifted. Curiosity did the rest. He lifted the cup and took a cautious sip, and in that quiet moment, something unexpected happened. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but noticeable. A gentle alertness, a calm clarity, as if his body and mind had both been nudged into balance at the same time. Of course, we don't know this moment as a recorded fact. It lives in legend, but that's exactly what makes it important. Because it tells us how people understood tea from the very beginning, not as a luxury, not as a habit, but as something with power. In those early days, tea wasn't shared in conversation or served in gatherings. It belonged to healers, to those who studied the body and the natural world. Leaves were used carefully, almost like medicine. People believed they could cool the system, ease discomfort, sharpen the mind. And for a long time, that knowledge stayed close to those who practiced it. Tea wasn't yet part of daily life. It was something quieter, something known but not yet understood by everyone. But over time, something began to change. What was once kept within small circles, among healers, scholars, and those who studied nature, started to move outward. Not all at once and not in a dramatic way, but gradually. People began to notice that this medicinal leaf did more than treat the body. It created a feeling, a state of mind, and that changed everything. Because once something moves from function to feeling, it no longer stays limited. It begins to spread. By the time of the Tang Dynasty, many centuries later, tea had already stepped beyond its original role. It was no longer only about healing or prevention. It became something people chose, not just something they used. Writers began describing it not as a remedy, but as an experience. They spoke about its color, its movement in water, the way it seemed to reflect light. Philosophers started linking it to ideas of balance and harmony, suggesting that the act of drinking tea could align a person with the natural world. Preparation itself started to matter. Instead of simply using leaves, people developed methods, grinding them, whisking them, turning the act into something almost ceremonial. The process slowed down. Attention increased. Every step began to carry intention. Tea was no longer just consumed, it was practiced. And once something becomes a practice, it doesn't stay still. It begins to travel, not just as a product, but as an idea. And that idea didn't stay in one place for long. Like many things that hold both usefulness and meaning, tea began to move, carried not only by merchants but by people searching for something deeper. Monks, travelers, students, they crossed mountains and borders, bringing with them small habits that quietly took root in new lands. One of the most important journeys led to Japan. There, tea was not simply adopted, it was transformed. Monks who had studied abroad returned home with seeds and knowledge, but what grew from them was something uniquely their own. Tea became part of discipline, part of focus, part of long hours spent in silence. But more than that, it became a path. In Japan, the act of making tea slowed down even further. Every movement was intentional. The way the bowl was held, the way water was poured, the way silence was shared, it all mattered. Tea was no longer just something you drank. It became something you experienced fully, moment by moment. In other places, it took on completely different forms. In colder regions, people needed energy and warmth, so tea was mixed with ingredients that might seem surprising, rich, heavy, even salty. In temples, it became part of ritual. In everyday homes, it became a quiet companion to daily life. The leaf remained the same, but everywhere it went, it learned to adapt. And that ability to change without losing its identity would soon carry tea much farther than anyone could have imagined. Because beyond these mountains and traditions, there was an entire world that had not yet discovered it. For a long time, that other world didn't even know tea existed. Across the oceans in Europe, daily life followed a completely different rhythm. People drank what they had always known: water when it was safe, beer or wine when it wasn't. Warm drinks existed, but nothing like this. Nothing made from leaves that carried both energy and calm at the same time. Then, slowly, that changed. The 1600s brought a new kind of movement. Ships began crossing vast distances, not just to explore, but to trade, to bring back spices, fabrics, and anything that felt rare or valuable. Among these unfamiliar goods was something light, dry, and easy to overlook at first glance: dried leaves. To the sailors and traders who first carried them back, tea must have seemed strange. A drink made by soaking leaves in hot water? Bitter at first taste, unfamiliar in every way. It wasn't immediately comforting. It had to be learned. And learning took time. At the beginning, tea was incredibly rare. It traveled thousands of miles, crossing dangerous seas, changing hands many times before reaching a European home. Only the wealthiest families could afford it. It was stored carefully, sometimes even locked away, treated more like a treasure than a daily drink. People didn't even know how to prepare it properly. Some misunderstood it completely, using the leaves in ways that missed the essence of what tea actually was. But slowly, through trial, curiosity, and conversation, that knowledge began to spread. And with it, something else began to grow. Not just the habit of drinking tea, but the desire for it. And once that desire took hold, it didn't stay small. Tea began to shift from a curiosity into a symbol. In the beginning, it was associated with wealth. Something rare, something refined, something that quietly signaled status. To serve tea was not just to offer a drink, but to show that you had access to a wider world. Doctors added to its appeal. They spoke about its benefits, suggesting it could sharpen the mind, ease discomfort, even improve mood. Whether all of those claims were true or not mattered less than the effect they had. Tea was no longer just unusual, it was desirable. social habits began to form around it. Gatherings appeared where tea became the center of attention. People talked, observed, compared. How it was served, what it tasted like, how it was prepared, these details started to matter. A simple drink was slowly becoming part of social identity. But something even bigger was happening beneath the surface. Because once demand increases, systems begin to organize around it. Trade routes expand. Companies form. Power begins to concentrate around who controls the supply. And among all the places in Europe, there was one country that would take this small habit and build an entire culture and even an economy around it. A country that didn't just adopt tea, but made it part of who they were. In Britain, tea didn't rise slowly. It accelerated. And strangely, it began with something very personal. In the 17th century, a young queen arrived from abroad, bringing with her not just her customs, but her preferences. Among them was a strong attachment to tea. She drank it regularly, openly, and without hesitation. That was enough. Because in royal courts, habits don't stay private. They spread. What the queen favored quickly became fashionable. Ladies in high society began to follow. Serving tea became elegant. Drinking tea became desirable. But influence alone doesn't change a nation. Access does. Behind the scenes, powerful trading organizations were expanding their reach across oceans. They were building routes, controlling supply, and bringing larger quantities of tea into Britain than ever before. As supply increased, something critical happened. The price began to fall. Slowly, tea moved beyond the palace. Merchants, professionals, and eventually ordinary households began to take part in what was once reserved for the elite. But this transition wasn't smooth. Taxes were high, regulations were strict, and wherever something is valuable but restricted, another system appears, an underground one. Tea began to move in hidden ways, smuggled, traded quietly, passed through hands outside official channels. For a time, the shadow market was almost as active as the legal one, which tells you something important. People didn't just enjoy tea. They wanted it badly enough to break the rules for it. Eventually, the system had to adjust. When something becomes that widespread, resisting it only creates more pressure. So the rules changed. Taxes were reduced. Supply increased even further. And for the first time, tea became truly accessible, not just to the wealthy, but to almost everyone. And that changed daily life in ways people didn't expect. In growing cities, especially during the Industrial Revolution, conditions were often difficult. Long working hours, crowded spaces, and one very practical problem. Clean drinking water wasn't always safe. Boiling water, however, made it safer. And tea required boiling water. So this simple habit carried an unexpected benefit. Workers who drank tea were not just staying alert, they were, in many cases, staying healthier. A hot cup became a reliable pause in long days of labor, something to hold, something to reset with, something that made harsh routines a little more bearable. Tea moved from luxury to necessity. At the same time, it also created new kinds of social spaces, public gardens, gathering spots, places where people could walk, talk, and share a cup. Tea was no longer just inside homes. It was shaping how people met and interacted. And somewhere in the middle of all this, between long workdays and social gatherings, another small shift began to take form. A pause within the day. Not for survival, but for something else. That pause didn't start as a tradition. It started as a feeling. In the early 19th century, daily routines in Britain were structured around just a few main meals. There was often a long stretch of time in the afternoon when energy dropped. And for some people, that gap became difficult to ignore. Not dramatic, just a quiet sense of hunger, a slight dip in focus, a moment where the day felt unfinished. So one solution appeared, almost casually, a small tray, a warm pot, something light to eat. What began as a personal habit soon became an invitation. Friends were asked to join. Conversations filled the space. The pause became something people looked forward to, not because they needed it, but because they enjoyed it. And that's how an ordinary gap in the day turned into a ritual. Afternoon tea wasn't just about the drink. It was about the atmosphere created around it. Carefully chosen cups. Simple foods arranged with attention. A setting that encouraged people to slow down, to speak, to listen. But this was only one version of tea. In a different part of society, the same drink played a very different role. For many workers, tea wasn't delicate or decorative. It was strong, practical, and filling. Combined with milk and sugar, it became a source of energy. Paired with bread or simple meals, it supported long hours of labor. Two worlds, one refined and leisurely, the other direct and functional. And yet, both built around the same small act, holding a cup, taking a pause, and continuing the day. While all of this was unfolding in Britain, busy rooms, shared conversations, cups, filled and refilled. Something very different was being preserved elsewhere. In China, tea never fully left its quieter roots. It remained close to the ideas that first gave it meaning. Balance, attention, connection with nature. Not rushed, not background noise, but something to be experienced with intention. To understand this, you have to slow down. Imagine a small table, a simple teapot, often made of clay, cups that fit easily in the hand. Nothing excessive, nothing distracting. The focus is not on quantity, but on detail. Before the tea is even tasted, there is preparation. The leaves are handled carefully. Water is poured with attention, not just to fill, but to awaken. Temperature matters. Timing matters. Even the way the steam rises carries information. Each step is deliberate, and when the tea is finally ready, it isn't consumed quickly. It's observed, sipped slowly, noticed as it changes from one pour to the next. The flavor deepens, softens, evolves. The experience unfolds over time. In this setting, tea is not there to support something else. It is the center. Philosophy is woven into the act itself. Ideas about harmony, simplicity, and being present in the moment are not explained. They are practiced. Drinking tea becomes a way of stepping out of distraction and into awareness. Even the decision not to add anything, no milk, no sugar, is part of that philosophy. It's about meeting the leaf as it is without covering it, without altering its character. So while one culture built tea into movement and society. Another kept it rooted in stillness and reflection. Two ways of experiencing the same thing. And that difference reveals something deeper than taste. If you place these two worlds side by side, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. In Britain, tea often sits in the background. It accompanies something else, a conversation, a meeting, a break between tasks. The focus is shared space, shared time. Tea supports the moment. In China, especially in traditional settings, tea is the moment. The attention doesn't drift outward. It settles inward. The drink is not secondary. It becomes the experience itself. Even the way it's prepared reflects this difference. One approach values speed and consistency, practical, repeatable, easy to share across busy lives. The other values variation and awareness, each cup slightly different, each step requiring presence. And then there's taste. In one culture, strength is softened. Milk, sugar, adjustments that make the drink comforting and familiar. In the other, the goal is to uncover what's already there, the natural layers of the leaf, the subtle changes across each infusion. But beyond preparation and flavor, there's something deeper at play. What tea represents. For some it means stability, a sense of home, a reliable pause in the middle of movement. For others, it represents harmony, a connection to nature, a reminder to slow down and observe. Two interpretations, same leaf. And yet, if you look closely, they are not as different as they seem. Because in both cases, tea creates space, a space to pause, a space to connect, either with others or with yourself. And that shared purpose might be the most important part of the story. Today, that small space exists almost everywhere. You can find it in crowded cities, in quiet villages, in hot climates and cold ones, in places that share no language, no history, no common traditions except this one, a cup, a pause, a moment that feels slightly separate from everything else. Tea no longer belongs to a single culture. It has been reimagined again and again. Sweet and minty in North Africa, spiced and rich in South Asia, cold and refreshing in summer heat, playful and modern in new forms that didn't exist just a few decades ago. It keeps changing because the people who drink it keep changing, and yet something remains the same. The reason we reach for it, not because we have to, not because someone tells us it is good for us, but because in some quiet way, it gives us something we recognize. A small return to ourselves. A break that doesn't need to be explained. If you follow that thread all the way back, through ships and stories, through rituals and revolutions, through kings, workers, monks, and families, you begin to see what has been there all along. It was never just about the leaf. It was about the human need behind it. So the next time you make tea, don't rush it. Watch the color change. Notice the heat in your hands. Take that first sip a little slower. Because in that simple act, you're stepping into something much larger than it seems. A quiet connection stretching across time, carried in the smallest of things. And wherever you are, however you drink it, that moment is yours.